Shalom, this is Shira Sherbo coming to you from Sfat, Israel, and I have some pretty cool things that I've been learning that I want to share with you. At Torah for the Nations here in Sfat, we teach the 7 universal laws for all mankind. You know, Israel was given the job to be a light to the nations, and we really haven't been able to do our job in all of history until like right now, because we finally have a homeland, we're finally not being persecuted, and so Israel has a message for the nations. And the message was given a long time ago to Noah. You know, after the flood, God gave us the rainbow, and he promised that he would never flood the earth again. But do you know why the earth was flooded in the first place? Was because the people were given basic laws to follow, basic laws of how to be human beings, how to have the kind of society that God wanted them to have, and they chose to act not like human beings. They chose to follow their animal instincts, to do kind of like a survival of the fittest society, and that was not pleasing to God. There's a couple other kind of societies that we read about in the Bible that God also didn't like. One of them was when it says after the flood that there were 70 nations and that they each had their own language. And we read that in chapter 10, but then by chapter 11, we read that there's a society where they're all speaking the same language and they're all building this Tower of Babel. And that was not pleasing to God. That sounds like a totalitarian society, kind of cultish. That was not what he had in mind. You know, we have this job to do. We're supposed to make this earth a home for God. We say in our prayers, you know, your will be done. God is our king. We are making this earth his kingdom. So it's about him, and it's about doing what he wants. And so when they were building the Tower of Babel, it had nothing to do with him. It had nothing to do with what he wanted. And he came down and he gave them back their 70 languages, because that's not world peace. That's not diversity. God wants us to have the message. Israel's message to the world is that there's dignity in difference, that it's okay to be a multicultural world, that we can live peacefully. We don't have to go around conquering everybody and trying to get them to see things the way we see it, or to do our language or to do our culture. God likes diversity, because another kind of society that we see that God came against was the kind with the pharaohs, where certain people were made in the image of God, or demigods, and all of the people were there to serve the few. Hierarchical societies. This was not pleasing to God. So Israel has a message for the world that we're finally able to deliver. The message is that there is dignity in difference, that we can live side by side and be different, have different languages, have different cultures, have different holidays, and we can live in peace. The thing is that there are a few basic laws that we have to follow to have a society where we show that we are not acting like animals, that we are civilized, that we are not doing to others what we would not want done to us. And so I thought there was a very interesting kind of deep Kabbalistic teaching that I learned about the colors of the rainbow. When God created the world, he created the world with 10 attributes. 3 are intellectual attributes, and then 7 are emotional attributes. And the 7 emotional or heart attributes, each one represents a different color of the rainbow. So I made this colorful 7-colored little Afghan spread to use as a visual aid to go through each of the 7 colors of the rainbow and show you how each one symbolizes one of the 7 laws that all mankind has to follow, just basic laws, so that we can be pleasing to God, that we can make this world a home for him, that we can just have the kind of society that we are living as human beings made in his image and not like animals. So the attributes that God used, anything good, like the attribute of loving kindness, if loving kindness is perverted, then we have sexual sins. And so the color blue is the prohibition against perverting God's loving kindness, which would be sins against adultery. So one of the things we have to do to have a good society, the kind that God wants us to have, is respect for the family. Okay, God also created the world with the attribute of might or restriction, because when you have loving kindness and you have to balance that out with restriction, like if you're being kind and watering a plant, you water the plant with restricted amounts of water. I've also heard it put like loving kindness is a waterfall and restriction is like the cup. So we need both. So if you take God's attribute of might or restriction and you pervert it, you get murder. So the red color of the rainbow is the commandment, the prohibition against murder. Do not murder. Okay, then we have yellow. God created the world with the attribute of beauty, and that's what the yellow stands for. If you pervert beauty is also giving honor to someone else and respect. And so this one is the prohibition against stealing, because it's very dishonorable, obviously, and disrespectful to steal from someone. Okay, we have orange, which God created the world with Thanksgiving, and if you take Thanksgiving and you pervert it, or you give it the exact opposite, you have the prohibition against blasphemy. The exact opposite of being thankful to God is blaspheming God. So we are prohibited to blaspheme God. That's the orange. Okay, then we have violet. Violet stands for victory, and this is the prohibition against idolatry. The exact opposite of victory would be when evil wins out over good, and really the only power that evil has is to convince us to worship other gods, to somehow distort who the one true God is. And so we have the prohibition against idolatry. That's violet. Okay, and green. Green is for foundation. Just God created the world with this idea of basic foundational spiritual truth. And if you pervert the very basic foundational things, you have cruelty and impulsiveness. And so the green is for the prohibition against eating the limb of a live animal, which is cruelty to animals, being impulsive. This prohibition also includes, well, there's not anything much more impulsive than rape, so that would come under just your basic foundational spiritual goodness that God created. So let's see, and the last one is the color indigo, which stands for kingdom or authority. This one kind of stands alone because it is the only positive commandment. All the commandments are put in like thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And then this one is setting up laws to make sure that all of the other ones are carried out. So we have the 7 colors of the rainbow. Each of them corresponds to an emotional attribute that God used when He created the world. And each one stands for one of the 7 Noahide laws that are universal, basic laws for all of us to do to make this home a world for God, a home for God. and to live as civilized human beings like He wants us to. So that, in a nutshell, is one of the things that we teach, that Israel's message to the nations is that we all need to get along. It doesn't mean we need to all do the same things or have the same culture or the same language, but that we can be different and live side by side and have true wholeness and peace that God wants. And the word for that is shalom. So shalom from Israel. That's all for now. Bye-bye.